When it comes to war, we inevitably have to talk about weapons. Since the dawn of civilization around 3500 BC until the 17th century, when powerful empires invaded all over the world, weapons have always evolved, becoming more sophisticated and powerful, shaping the nature of warfare and the global balance of power. Throughout history, civilizations with increasingly advanced science and technology have developed ever more deadly weapons. Some weapons have existed for thousands of years, creating legendary battles, while others only appeared briefly and disappeared when circumstances changed. In any era, weapons have always shaped the course of warfare, paving the way for empires to rise or fall, while also reflecting human aspirations and limitations throughout different periods. Let us analyze the weapons that dominated throughout history. Before the advent of rifles and gunpowder, spears, halberds, polearms, and lances have all pierced their targets. Since prehistoric times, humans have known how to use tree branches to fend off wild animals and also to fight each other. At first, people instinctively used branches by simply gripping and striking the enemy on the head. Then, one warrior, accidentally, noticed that the tip of a stick that had been burned became sharper, and by removing the charred part it became even sharper, thus creating a fearsome weapon. Archaeological findings have uncovered such sharpened sticks among animal bones. During the Stone Age, people learned to sharpen stones and shells to make tools. Then someone tried placing one of these sharp objects on a long pole, creating the spear. Naturally, the next step was to replace the stone tip with bronze or iron tips in later periods. Spears with bronze tips appeared in the Near East around 3500 BC. From then until the second half of the 17th century, the spear and the lance remained among the most important weapons in warfare. In prehistoric times, spears were often thrown rather than used to stab directly, as hunting was essential. But game animals were fast and rarely let humans get close enough to thrust a spear, so they learned to throw them. When humans began to gather in urban settlements, agriculture developed and provided a stable food supply. Hunting became secondary, and so they gradually abandoned the habit of throwing spears. Humans then developed warfare tactics that suited their way of life. On the battlefield, they formed square formations, holding long spears to stab enemies scattered around them. These were known as phalanxes. The phalanx formation led to the development of armor as a whole. Phalanx often became easy prey for javelin throwers, or especially archers. However, a phalanx wearing armor was ready to face even larger groups of archers. King Philip II of Barcelona introduced the Greek phalanx formation into his military system, and his son Alexander used that system to conquer vast territories from Greece to India. The Romans later improved the phalanx formation by giving their legionaries a spear alongside their long pike. The first two rows of soldiers would throw these spears at the enemy. Each spear was about 1.8 meters long, with a yizhidza wooden shaft and a sharp iron tip. If the enemy blocked the spear with a shield, the legionaries would step on the spear shaft to dislodge the shield and then finish the enemy with swords. Spears evolved into various polearms. Some had barbs for added damage, others featured short swords at the tip for slashing like the Japanese naginata, and some combined a sharp point and an axe blade known as a halberd. Very long spears were called pikes, and Swiss phalanx troops in the Renaissance used them to counter enemy cavalry, allowing soldiers with halberds to get close and destroy them. Spears were also used by cavalry. Alexander deployed heavy cavalry with lances to finish off enemies after his phalanx formations pinned them down. The spear remained the primary weapon for European cavalry until the 16th century, when firearms became common, though the Poles and Russians still used lances in World War II. Some nations also had cavalry armed with javelins, like the Greeks in the Peloponnesian War, the Numidian cavalry under Hannibal, and the Spanish cavalry. From Europe to China to Africa, the spear was an extremely common and fundamental weapon from ancient times until the widespread use of gunpowder. The longbow was a deadly ranged weapon. King Edward III of England invaded France with 10,000 troops, 1/3 of whom were armored knights and the rest archers. His enemy, King Philip VI of France, had 12,000 troops, including 8,000 armored cavalry and 4,000 Genoese crossbowmen. The French blocked the English near the town of Crécy. When the two sides came within range, the Genoese crossbowmen fired. First, But the English countered with a devastating weapon that stunned their foes. The English longbowmen unleashed a rain of arrows on the Genoese, who thought they were out of range. The result was heavy casualties among the Genoese, and the English easily overwhelmed them because their archers outnumbered them and fired 5 times faster. Terrified, the Genoese fled. Seeing this, the French cavalry charged the English, but instead of attacking the archers, they engaged the English knights, believing it would be more honorable to defeat a knight than a mere archer. This allowed the English archers to keep firing freely. By the end of the day, a third of the French army was destroyed, while the English lost just over 100 men. The Battle of Crécy marked the first time England emerged as a major military power. The longbow did not have a longer range than the crossbow. The defeat was due to the Genoese's lack of knowledge about archery, their failure to fire at maximum range, and their decision to advance into a more visible position. Both bows and crossbows reached maximum range when fired at an angle of 43 degrees. A medieval crossbow could shoot up to 401 meters, while an English longbow had a maximum range of about 228.5 meters. The power of a bow depended on 3 factors: the draw weight of the bow, the speed at which the string snapped back, and the distance the string had to push the arrow. His ancient arrow was 71 centimeters long, and to match it, his bow also had to be long. His 1.7-meter bow was made from yew wood, requiring a draw weight of 32 to 36 kilograms to shoot an arrow accurately without damaging the bow. A longbow demands a lifetime of practice to master, and they have recreated a longbow based on an excavated model that measures 1.84 meters with a draw weight of just 23 kilograms, shooting an arrow 170 meters. They then shortened it to 1.8 meters, achieving a draw weight of 28 kilograms and a range of 206 meters. When cut further to 1.7 meters, it reached 32 kilograms of draw weight, sending an arrow 224 meters away. The bow was hardly a new weapon. It had been an important tool and weapon since the Bronze Age, when nomadic warriors swept across Europe. Excavated graves from this period often contained bow-related items. Later, Europeans witnessed the exceptional effectiveness of Greek warriors in armor and their shock combat tactics, leading to the gradual replacement of bows with axes, spears, and eventually swords, as shock combat proved more effective in the forests of Europe than archery. Nevertheless, the bow continued to be an important weapon in Scandinavia, where naval battles were common and ranged weapons remained crucial. The English, lacking effective ranged weapons, only found success after conquering Wales, where Welsh arrows could pierce the armor of Norman soldiers. The success of Welsh archers led to the resurgence of the longbow in the English infantry. The English longbow was a simple self-bow, but a much more complex bow was widely used across Asia: the composite bow. The composite bow was why the Hittites conquered Egypt, why the Romans lost the Battle of Bafia, why the Crusaders were defeated, and why Genghis Khan crushed every opponent on his path to conquest. It took over a year to make a single composite bow, requiring the wooden core to be bent with the help of steam, the back to be reinforced with horse or cow sinews soaked in special glue, and the belly to be layered with horn. After adding all components, the bow was strung, a difficult process that ruined many bows. In the end, they had a short but flexible bow capable of shooting long arrows. The composite bow was first invented in Central Asia, and with it, the Mongols decimated enemy cavalry and infantry from Central Asia to Sukhothai. It was the most powerful handheld weapon before gunpowder. The English longbow changed warfare in Europe for about a century, but the composite bow had dominated Asia for at least 4,000 years. The sword became a symbol of war. Japan revered the sword and swordsmanship so much that they developed a philosophy of living by the sword known as Bushido. Outside Japan, the sword was also a symbolic weapon across various cultures. One reason was that until the industrial era, swords were expensive, affordable only to the wealthy. It took a lot of metal to make a sword, whereas the same amount of material could make quite a few axes, knives, or arrowheads. Moreover, forging a sword is a meticulous task that requires crafting iron strong enough to hold a sharp edge yet flexible enough not to break when striking. This process takes a significant amount of time and resources, which is why swords were often passed down from father to son. However, if one had money, people were willing to pay for these weapons because they were longer than daggers, yet short enough to be practical and far more versatile than a spear. A sword could slash, stab, and parry. For the ancient Greeks, the sword was a last resort weapon to be used only when no other weapon was available. The Romans, however, considered the sword an essential part of their equipment. A Roman legionary would throw his pilum at the enemy, but relied on his gladius to finish the fight. The gladius was worn on the right side so that the large shield did not hinder the drawing of the weapon. The success of Greece and Rome established the tradition of armored warfare throughout Europe, from the barefoot warriors of the Franks to the cavalry of the Goths. From the Celts to the Teutons, all regarded the sword as the most important weapon. Spears were great for keeping the enemy at bay, but it was the sword that ruled the battle. In Asia, the sword also played a crucial role. The Huns would open the battle with arrows, but once the enemy was weakened and demoralized, would charge in with swords. The Turks greatly valued the use of swords, but this became problematic when they faced armies equipped with heavy armor. In Africa, the sword was also a primary weapon among local tribes. When British and French soldiers arrived during the 1880s, they still encountered indigenous warriors wielding their traditional swords against European gunmen. During the medieval period, the sword became an indispensable item for knights, just as it was for the Japanese samurai. Infantry carried swords up until the 18th century, even though they used muskets with bayonets, while cavalry carried revolvers but still retained swords. Today, swords are mostly ceremonial in the few units that still carry them, but for thousands of years, from Roman times to the American Civil War, they were vital weapons of war. The Japanese were the last to hold the sword in high regard. During World War II, many reports confirmed that Japanese soldiers fought with swords, and some even used them to strike at tanks. Like spears and bows, warships have existed since prehistoric times, initially as simple dugout canoes and later as lighter vessels made of animal hides or bark, stretched over wooden frames. Someone eventually discovered that adding a sail allowed movement with the wind without paddling, leading to larger, sturdier ships. An ancient Greek warship could carry around 18 soldiers on deck, 162 rowers, and over 20 officers managing the ship and the crew, all armed for combat at any time. The ship measured about 32 meters long, carried 70 tons, and could travel up to 90 meters per minute. These ships were easy to maneuver, capable of turning 180 degrees while stationary. Their favored tactic involved retracting the oars and using them to smash the enemy's oars, while sailors would hurl Greek fire onto the enemy vessel to set it ablaze, pour sticky liquids to make the deck slippery, or even throw barrels of venomous snakes to terrify their foes. During the Greek and Roman eras, warships developed extensively and were often equipped with catapults. In the 7th century, the Roman army also adopted a special weapon called Greek fire. Without war galleys, empires in the Mediterranean could not have transported large numbers of troops to conquer distant lands, just as the Vikings could not have dominated northern Europe. Naval warfare in ancient times would not have developed to such an extent. Armor effectively blocked all attacks. Throughout history, armies from every nation have been equipped with armor, which was made from various materials, not just metal. The Chinese made armor from coins sewn onto animal hide. The Siberians used armor made from wood, animal hides, and iron. There were even coconut fiber and fish skin armors used by the Gilbertes in the South Pacific. In Greece, linen and leather armors were popular. Armor evolved according to the weapons it was designed to counter. Coconut fiber and fish skin armors could not stop an iron sword thrust, but could negate the damage caused by slingshots, which were the main weapons of the indigenous people there. Roman soldiers with their gladius were trained that too well placed, strikes could be fatal, which is why they conquered the Celts. During the medieval period, chainmail became the main armor for European knights. A general from Saladin's army once described seeing a soldier with 21 arrows stuck in his body, still moving easily. Slashing with a sword was a more instinctive action than thrusting, making chainmail extremely common from Arabia and Persia to India and even West African kingdoms like Bonu and Mali. In hot climates, Africans and Arabs covered their armor with fabric to shield it from direct sunlight, preventing the armor from turning into an oven. European crusaders learned this technique from their enemies. The Greeks favored bronze armor since they could melt and cast it into large plates, whereas there were no furnaces hot enough to melt iron at that time. For centuries, iron armor consisted of small plates, as seen in chainmail and scale armor, with another type called lamella armor, used extensively by the Japanese. The Romans also used armor with plates covering the chest and bronze plates on the back. By the late medieval period, with crossbows becoming increasingly lethal, many soldiers in chainmail began to wear overcoats with small iron plates sewn into them. European blacksmiths managed to create large, light steel plates strong enough to withstand new powerful weapons, such as the longbow, iron-limbed crossbows with draw weights up to 453 kilograms, and firearms. As weapons became more powerful, armor grew thicker until it became too heavy to wear, and gradually metal leg armor was replaced by long leather boots. By the 17th century, leather coats had also begun to replace iron torso armor. Nevertheless, all these types of armor could not match the effectiveness of the shield. A close-range crossbow bolt could pierce a metal breastplate, though not completely through, lodging halfway in, yet that was enough to kill if the arrow was 7/10 of a span long. The same could happen if the arrow struck a shield with similar force. It could not touch the body, or even if it penetrated the shield, it would no longer be strong enough to pierce any type of armor. The shield was extremely important to the Greek army. The hoplite warriors called the shield a hoplon, and for a hoplite, losing a shield was considered a deep shame. Archers or crossbowmen could not hold a shield, but they came up with a solution. They wore large shields on their backs and turned their backs toward the enemy while reloading. However, this shield was too close to their bodies. Another method was using large standing shields, which were placed upright on the ground. This was so effective that in many countries, it became the only form of armor. Spanish infantry swordsmen of the 16th century even used shields that could resist musket fire. The invention of gunpowder did not eliminate armor. The First World War saw the official large-scale return of armor. The most common item was the steel helmet, which protected soldiers in the trenches from shrapnel. In World War II, aircrew wore bulletproof vests to protect against anti-aircraft fragments. By the end of the Korean War, infantrymen wore nylon bulletproof vests that only protected against artillery fragments or small arms fire, but could not stop rifle bullets. Nowadays, Kevlar vests have metal, ceramic, or plastic armor plates that can stop most rifle rounds. Riot police often wear Kevlar vests, and modern soldiers are equipped with armor just as thoroughly as 17th century soldiers. War horses and chariots changed the battlefield. In 1755 BC, the Hyksos from Mesopotamia invaded and quickly conquered all of Egypt without facing significant resistance. This was due to their tradition of mobile warfare with chariots, which allowed them to dominate the Egyptians, who had been isolated until then. The Hyksos used 2 horse chariots, with one person driving and another shooting a composite bow at the enemy. However, the Hyksos made a mistake by not occupying Upper Egypt, a mountainous area unsuitable for a people who relied on chariots. This delay allowed the southern Egyptians time to learn how to make composite bows, domesticate horses, and most importantly, develop and use chariots like the Hyksos. Eventually, the Egyptians returned, drove the Hyksos out of their territory, and even pursued them to their homeland. The homeland of the war chariot was in Mesopotamia, where the Sumerians first developed a 4-wheeled chariot pulled by 2 donkeys with high sides and manned by a driver and a javelin thrower. It was cumbersome and hard to maneuver. The Sumerians then improved it into a 2-wheeled chariot still pulled by donkeys, making it more agile though still heavy, but very effective on the battlefield, especially against slow-moving formations, like the phalanx. Later, the Hittites further improved the chariot, which was now pulled by lighter horses, had 2 wheels with spoked construction and sides made from wicker and a floor made from animal hide. The nomadic peoples were able to produce an incredibly powerful composite bow. They soon realized that this new weapon system was not only useful for hunting, but also highly effective against enemies. The combination of war chariots and composite bows quickly spread across all the Iranian-speaking tribes. These nomads began using this system to launch invasions everywhere. The Aryans poured through the Iranian deserts to reach the Ganges basin and wiped out one of the world's 3 earliest civilizations with writing. The Mitanni invaded Anatolia and established a kingdom there. Some Mitanni joined forces with the Hittites and moved into Syria. The success of the Iranian-speaking peoples was so impressive that all the peoples east of the Mediterranean adopted chariot warfare. Only the isolated Egyptians, separated by vast deserts, remained naive until the Hyksos invaded and introduced them to it. Under the leadership of the pharaoh, the Egyptians drove the Hyksos back to their homeland. The Egyptian archers adopted a new tactic of mass volleys on command, overwhelming enemies with a rain of arrows that caused instant panic. The Egyptian advance eventually brought them into conflict with another rising power, the Hittite Empire. The clash between the Egyptians and Hittites at Megiddo became legendary. Tactically, the Hittites won the battle, but strategically both sides were stalemated and neither empire advanced further. Eventually, chariots were phased out as stronger. Horses were bred that could carry a rider on their back. When archers mastered shooting from horseback, their firepower doubled compared to a 2-horse chariot, carrying just 1 archer and 1 driver. Centuries later, the invention of the stirrup greatly enhanced cavalry power, rendering the chariot obsolete. The spread of the stirrup began with the Battle of Adrianople, when the Romans faced the Goths and Alans. Although these groups were originally refugees within the empire, they had now rebelled. The Goths unleashed their cavalry, charging directly into the Roman legions. Until then, the Romans had underestimated cavalry, believing a mounted soldier could not form a solid block with his horse and had to rely heavily on balance, making his lance less effective than that of a stable Roman legionary on foot. But this time was completely different from what the Romans expected. The cavalrymen's feet were securely placed in metal rings hanging from the horse, forging a solid link between rider and mount. The full momentum and strength of a 453-kilogram horse were now focused at the tip of the lance. As a result, the Yasu Romans suffered a devastating defeat, with the deadly thrusts shattering wooden shields and piercing bronze armor. This was one of the worst Roman defeats since Hannibal destroyed 2 of their armies in 216 BC. That defeat led to the widespread adoption of the stirrup across Central and Western Europe. The stirrup made it possible to build heavily armored cavalry units that remained highly effective for 1,000 years. Archaeological evidence from Edward Organ's research shows that the stirrup was already in use in the East as early as the 4th century BC. Temple carvings in India, dating from the 2nd century BC, also depict horsemen using saddles with stirrups. The Sarmatians in Europe wore heavy armor and used both lances and bows, and all of them used stirrups. The Goths learned to use the horse stirrup from them. The Vandals, the Cape people, and other East Germanic tribes, as well as the Skangai. Navy tribes who swept into Eastern Europe all did the same. Of course, the Hunza people who drove other tribes to flee into the Roman Empire also used the horse stirrup. The Huns remained in Hungary after the fall of the Athenian Empire and later became the most formidable cavalry of the Byzantine Empire. Greek fire, the mysterious and legendary weapon, emerged in the 7th century AD. The Arabs, under the leadership of the prophet Marina, united the Sharsan tribes and then rose powerfully, flooding into Palestine and Syria. In 600 BA6, they defeated a Roman army at the Yahu Gorge, and by 640 they had completely destroyed the Persian Empire. While one Arab army conquered Persia, others captured Babylon and Egypt, swept through North Africa and reached Katad. The Arabs took control of the cities of Syria, whose inhabitants were skilled seafarers, thereby building a powerful naval fleet. In 653 they captured Cyprus, and in 655 they defeated a large Eastern Roman fleet, personally commanded by Emperor Constantine. In 607, the Arabs dispatched a formidable fleet toward Mamar, the gateway to Constantinople. Meanwhile, the Eastern Roman Empire had not yet recovered from the long, costly war with Persia that had ended 44 years earlier. That is why the Arabs were able to conquer Persia so easily. Arab warriors drew their bows and prepared their warships to sweep away the Roman ships that dared to leave the port. On the other side, the Eastern Roman ships appeared colorful, with a golden beast statue on the prow of each warship. When the Arab warriors raised their bows, those beast statues opened their mouths and sprayed liquid toward the Arab ships, and that liquid caught fire almost instantly. The Arabs tried to douse the flames with water but failed. The fire raged fiercely, forcing the invading fleet to retreat. The Prophet's followers did not easily give up, and time and again they launched fleets to attack, but each time they were burned by the weapon that would come to be known as Greek fire. The Eastern Romans regarded it as a divine weapon given by God to resist the Muslims, so the formula was kept secret for centuries. However, when gunpowder was invented, the weapon gradually faded into oblivion. There were many different descriptions of Greek fire in ancient documents, leading to various theories about its true nature. Therefore, not everything called Greek fire was necessarily the same material that destroyed the Arab fleets. Some ancient texts mention that Greek fire could burn even in water. A document dated about 4 centuries later stated that the Eastern Roman warships had beast heads at the prow, all made of bronze and gold-plated, designed to terrify the enemy. The flame was designed to spew from the mouth as if the beast itself were breathing fire. Elsewhere, there was a description of a kind of fire-spraying bronze pipe that used highly flammable colophony resin extracted from pine trees, mixed with sulfur, then packed into reed tubes and blown with a strong breath. At the other end of the tube was a fire starter that ignited the material, which fell in a blazing streak onto the enemy's faces. Later, crusading soldiers reported that Muslims had attacked them with Greek fire launched by catapults. It was like a wine barrel filled with flammable liquid, with an external fuse that exploded upon impact, creating a fireball that engulfed everything nearby. Clearly, this was not the same weapon that had once protected Constantinople. Most modern researchers believe that the flamethrowers used at the Battle of Constantinople discharged a mixture that included lime, petroleum, or resin. The lime would become extremely hot when it came into contact with water. The liquid was probably sprayed from the mouth of an animal-shaped nozzle, functioning like a pump, and as soon as it left the nozzle, it ignited immediately. Because the liquid, which contained petroleum, was lighter than water, pouring water on it had no effect except to spread it further. This created the perception among enemies that once ignited, Greek fire could not be extinguished. Consequently, this weapon became both a psychological and a physical weapon. Greek fire changed warfare in the Eastern Mediterranean for centuries. If the Byzantines had not possessed Greek fire at the Battle of Constantinople, Islam might have swept across all of Europe. Mechanical artillery, the silent cannons a general from Sicily presented to King Achiramus of Sparta, an invention that had been successfully used by the people of Syracuse against the Carthaginians. It was a machine with a giant bow mounted horizontally on a wooden frame. The bowstring was attached to a sliding carriage that could be drawn back by a winch. The bow was too stiff for a human to draw unaided, so this system was necessary. The sliding carriage was pulled all the way back and held in place by a catch. A soldier would then pull a cord that released the catch, allowing the bow to propel a heavy, long arrow farther than any archer could manage. They would then reload the weapon and fire another shot at the enemy's shield or armor, the arrow piercing through everything. The general smiled proudly, awaiting his reward, but the king recoiled in horror. In the name of Hera, he declared that this would end human bravery. For most Greeks around 370 BC, warfare was slow and involved blocks of heavily armored infantry. Bravery was the greatest virtue of a soldier, especially for the Spartans, whose warriors always strove to be the most courageous and the most skillful. Now, using a machine to slaughter enemy warriors seemed cowardly and pathetic. Most Greeks shared this sentiment, except for the people of Syracuse. Syracuse was a young city-state that did not organize its army into blocks of heavily armored infantry, like the other Greek states. Its ambitious king Dionysius aimed to unite all the Greek cities on Sicily against the Carthaginian Empire. He actively recruited scientists, engineers, and craftsmen to develop new weapons for Syracuse, treating them with great respect. As a result, many top engineers flocked to Syracuse. The earliest artillery machines fired arrows-long, heavy projectiles like spears, but others were designed to hurl stones. These machines usually had double arms and a leather pouch to hold the stone ammunition. It took a long time before the city-states of ancient Greece truly accepted this kind of mechanical artillery. The machines were deployed on a large scale by King Philip II of Macedon. Like King Dionysius, Philip II regarded catapults of ancient times primarily as siege engines, but both Philip II and his son, Alexander the Great, also used them as field artillery. Once, when Alexander's army tried to cross the Jaxartes River, the Scythian forces on the opposite bank, skilled horse archers, blocked the crossing. Alexander arranged his catapults on the riverbank and had them shoot arrows across the river, launching a volley that killed around 10 enemies. Each arrow penetrated both the target's shield and chest armor, sometimes even killing both a horseman and his horse with a single shot. Terrified by the range and power of the catapults, the Scythians retreated from the riverbank, allowing Alexander's forces to cross. These ancient field artillery pieces had a greater psychological effect than purely lethal force. And history is full of such weapons. The mechanical artillery pieces were highly effective in sieges. Bolt throwers easily shot defenders off the walls from a distance out of bow range, while stone throwers could collapse walls or destroy structures inside. Engineers continually improved the accuracy and durability of these machines. The Romans used small catapults called carabalistae mounted on wheels, and they also developed a new type of stone thrower called the onager with a single throwing arm and a sling for the stone. Like the Macedonians, the Romans used their artillery for both sieges and battlefield support, with every unit equipped with one. In medieval Western Europe, a new siege engine called the trebuchet appeared. A pivoted beam with a short arm holding a counterweight and a long arm with a sling for the projectile. When the catch was released, the counterweight arm swung down, catapulting the long arm upward and hurling the projectile into enemy fortifications. In the Middle Ages, corpses were also catapulted over walls to spread disease. Trebuchets were extremely large and cumbersome, but modern experiments have built powerful models capable of launching a car several hundred meters. Emperor Napoleon III of France once owned a trebuchet decorated with a 10-meter-long beam and a counterweight of 5.4 kilograms that could throw a 2.7-kilogram rock 182.8 meters. In ancient Greece, at the height of mechanical artillery, these machines, though modest in presence, played a crucial role in international relations. Not only did you need to have the weapons, but you also needed to ensure that your potential enemies knew you had them, so they would think twice before attacking you. Postmodern researchers believe that the flamethrowers used at the Battle of Constantinople discharged a mixture that included lime, petroleum, or resin. The lime would become extremely hot when it came into contact with water. The liquid was probably sprayed from the mouth of an animal-shaped nozzle, functioning like a pump, and as soon as it left the nozzle, it ignited immediately. Because the liquid, which contained petroleum, was lighter than water, pouring water on it had no effect except to spread it further. This created the perception among enemies that once ignited, Greek fire could not be extinguished. Consequently, this weapon became both a psychological and a physical weapon. Greek fire changed warfare in the Eastern Mediterranean for centuries. If the Byzantines had not possessed Greek fire at the Battle of Constantinople, Islam might have swept across all of Europe. Mechanical artillery, the silent cannons a general from Sicily presented to King Acaramus of Sparta, an invention that had been successfully used by the people of Syracuse against the Carthaginians. It was a machine with a giant bow mounted horizontally on a wooden frame. The bowstring was attached to a sliding carriage that could be drawn back by a winch. The bow was too stiff for a human to draw unaided, so this system was necessary. The sliding carriage was pulled all the way back and held in place by a catch. A soldier would then pull a cord that released the catch, allowing the bow to propel a heavy, long arrow farther than any archer could manage. They would then reload the weapon and fire another shot at the enemy's shield or armor, the arrow, piercing through everything. The general smiled proudly, awaiting his reward, but the king recoiled in horror. In the name of Hera, he declared that this would end human bravery. For most Greeks around 370 BC, warfare was slow and involved blocks of heavily armored infantry. Bravery was the greatest virtue of a soldier, especially for the Spartans, whose warriors always strove to be the most courageous and the most skillful. Now, using a machine to slaughter enemy warriors seemed cowardly and pathetic. Most Greeks shared this sentiment except for the people of Syracuse. Syracuse was a young city-state that did not organize its army into blocks of heavily armored infantry like the other Greek states. Its ambitious king, Dionysius, aimed to unite all the Greek cities on Sicily against the Carthaginian Empire. He actively recruited scientists, engineers, and craftsmen to develop new weapons for Syracuse, treating them with great respect. As a result, many top engineers flocked to Syracuse. The earliest artillery machines fired arrows-long, heavy projectiles like spears, but others were designed to hurl stones. These machines usually had double arms and a leather pouch to hold the stone ammunition. It took a long time before the city-states of ancient Greece truly accepted this kind of mechanical artillery. The machines were deployed on a large scale by King Philip II of Macedon. Like King Dionysius, Philip II regarded catapults of ancient times primarily as siege engines, but both Philip II and his son, Alexander the Great, also used them as field artillery. Once, when Alexander's army tried to cross the Jaxartes River, the Scythian forces on the opposite bank skilled horse archers blocked the crossing. Alexander arranged his catapults on the riverbank and had them shoot arrows across the river, launching a volley that killed around 10 enemies. Each arrow penetrated both the target's shield and chest armor, sometimes even killing both a horseman and his horse with a single shot. Terrified by the range and power of the catapults, the Scythians retreated from the riverbank, allowing Alexander's forces to cross. These ancient field artillery pieces had a greater psychological effect than purely lethal force. And history is full of such weapons. The mechanical artillery pieces were highly effective in sieges. Bolt throwers easily shot defenders off the walls from a distance out of bow range, while stone throwers could collapse walls or destroy structures inside. Engineers continually improved the accuracy and durability of these machines. The Romans used small catapults called carabalistae mounted on wheels, and they also developed a new type of stone thrower called the onager with a single throwing arm and a sling for the stone. Like the Macedonians, the Romans used their artillery for both sieges and battlefield support, with every unit equipped with one. In medieval Western Europe, a new siege engine called the trebuchet appeared. A pivoted beam with a short arm holding a counterweight and a long arm with a sling for the projectile. When the catch was released, the counterweight arm swung down, catapulting the long arm upward and hurling the projectile into enemy fortifications. In the Middle Ages, corpses were also catapulted over walls to spread disease. Trebuchets were extremely large and cumbersome, but modern experiments have built powerful models capable of launching a car several hundred meters. Emperor Napoleon III of France once owned a trebuchet decorated with a 10-meter-long beam and a counterweight of 5.4 kilograms that could throw a 2.7-kilogram rock 182.8 meters. In ancient Greece, at the height of mechanical artillery, these machines, though modest in presence, played a crucial role in international relations. Not only did you need to have the weapons, but you also needed to ensure that your potential enemies knew you had them, so they would think twice before attacking you.